That balloon posed no threat to American national security, the Biden administration claimed. Why? Because the balloon never transmitted data back to China. Now, how could officials know that? They never explained. Nor did they say whether the Chinese military would send one of its aircraft all the way to the U.S. without a satellite uplink. Apparently, the Chinese just forgot. They're not very good at technology.
Cash over country.
We sometimes discover that threats to our national security come from inside our most esteemed institutions.
For almost 2 years, today's indictment charges 26-year-old petty officer Wen Hengzhou betrayed his country, selling military secrets to the Chinese government. Arrested separately on espionage charges, Jin Xiao Wei, a 22-year-old machinist mate aboard the USS Essex. Wei allegedly sold the Chinese naval defense information and dozens of technical and mechanical military manuals, all while he was applying to become a U.S. citizen.
The fact that they got a bug in a conference room on the 7th floor, just down the hall from the Secretary of State, is just astounding.
Welcome, I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News. Today, a subject that is both frightening and fascinating, and that is domestic spying. Right, how to gather intelligence and domestic spying that's happening right here on our own soil. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I will tell you this, the impetus behind today's show was the plethora of misinformation that was disseminated by a variety of outlets on the spy balloon, which remember earlier in the year. We're going to touch on that. But for today, the purpose of today's show, and I'm going to be joined by someone that I am very blessed and very fortunate to call a dear friend, one of our country's finest patriots. I'm talking about none other than retired Brigadier General Dan Goodrich. And General Goodrich is going to join us to lay out the facts about not just domestic spying, but intelligence gathering, how we do it, how other countries do it, and what's in it for them and what we need to watch out for in our own neighborhood. So don't leave right now, because by the time I finish benchmarking this subject in a couple minutes, when General Goodrich comes on, you are going to be more than happy with the fact that you hung in there today, because we got a lot in store. Why are we doing this show? Well, because it's important for all of us as Americans to understand this subject, not the sensationalism that comes with the quote-unquote gathering intel, but really the factual-based information on how we as a country gather intelligence, why we do it, the types of intelligence, what we use it for, and how other countries, specifically China, North Korea, Russia, and quite a few others, are gathering intelligence on us on a daily basis. Why they do it, how they use it, and how your information is important to them. So with all that being said, that is really the basis of why we're going to focus on this today. We're going to set the record straight. Unfortunately, we're going to set the record straight on just the myriad of information and posts that have come out on that spy balloon, which was upsetting nonetheless. But let's just start out with the basics. So as far as really what intel is, I mean, I know that we've heard this a million times, but what is it? Let's break it down by this now. We have domestic gathering intelligence, we have global gathering intelligence, and then we have military gathering intelligence. So let's start out with domestic. As a country, as the United States, when we gather intel, we gather that from city police departments, state police departments, federal law enforcement agencies, and it's gathered in a variety of different ways. That information to mitigate risks that are being pointed at your community from those particular sources. And it could be a national source, it could be a local source. But the gathering of intelligence is critical for us to have valid and reliable efforts in policing and in national security. Then we look at, and of course I don't want to leave out the NSA. The NSA now, the NSA has gotten a lot of bad press, but I will assure you, is a phenomenal organization, and an organization not just equipped with to say state of the art would be, kind of underscoring that, but equipped with not just the finest technology, but brain trust that we have in this country. and the NSA responsible for protecting us from massive amounts of threats, many of which we will never see, because of the intel that they gather in a variety of ways, and we'll get into that later. Global intelligence is something that, and you've probably seen a million different movies about this, where we as a nation, specifically the Central Intelligence Agency, where we spend a lot of time placing assets or human beings around the globe to infiltrate certain parts of the world so that we can, believe it or not, get close to the bad guy so that we can garner information about what their plans are to hurt us here and abroad. That's right. If I were to look back over my career, and if I were to say, listen, if there's one agency that I think we just simply couldn't do without, it's the CIA. Now, granted, by saying that, I will also tell you unequivocally that out of all the things that I've seen on television and the movies, it's probably the most misrepresented. But by far, the agency that I would have to applaud the most for preemptively protecting Americans from matters that would have been catastrophic that they will never know about, that's the CIA. And then, of course, you have military intelligence. Now, General Goodrich is going to touch on that in a couple of minutes. Military intelligence is strategic when you think about it. It's garnering information so we know what to position, where to position, what we need to have available, our staffing and our technology and our armament, all to protect Americans on American soil and American interests worldwide. So when you look at the main three, those are the main three. How it's done? Now, we'll switch back to domestic, for example. There's something called open source information. And bear in mind, you can always go to factbasednews.com and go to our library, and all of this information from today's show is going to be there. But open source information is not necessarily available around the globe. It is available in the United States. Open source information is information that's available to either A, by public knowledge, or B, if you have an own proprietary sources, databases, that will help you garner information like criminal information and civil information, real estate information, marital information. Everything about your life kind of sits in an open source or database in the United States, and a little bit in Canada, a little bit in the UK, really not available around the globe. But as far as open source information, think of it that way. It's how we do backgrounds. That in itself is really the baseline when it comes to the mode or the temperament of information gathering in the United States. Now let's take a look at signals intelligence. And that's important. It's important because when we looked at the balloon case, and we're going to talk about this with General Goodrich in a minute, when we looked at that balloon, some of the things that made me just overly irate about this was, the misinformation, we didn't know until it was right on top of us, which is false. It was a weather balloon, which was false. Signals intelligence is gathered by something such as a balloon so that it can extrapolate cell phone traffic and radio traffic, our traffic, in this like massive vacuum, pulls it all up into this device or this balloon, and then it immediately sends it in real time to a set location where that information then can be broken down and disseminated by analyst after analyst. I'll get into it in a bit, but that's exactly what signals intelligence is. And it's extremely important in gathering information against our country for a variety of reasons we'll get into. And last but not least is human intelligence. Human intelligence, by far the most valid, the most reliable, the most dangerous, the most costly. Human intelligence is when we place individuals, assets, inside people's lives, in communities, for extended periods of time, and we befriend ourselves to them so that they believe we're one of them. And from that, we obtain and garner a significant amount of critical information. Very dangerous, but by far the most valid and reliable. Now, we'll get into that. Things involving covert surveillance and cyber surveillance and electronic surveillance, all of that comes from under the umbrella of intelligence gathering. So when we started today and we started really kind of laying out the foundation for today's show and why really the impetus again of behind it. It's so that we are very clear about what is going on right here in our country. China, Russia, Cuba, North Korea, primary sources about putting camps here in the United States, befriending us in our own communities. It's happening every day. As I said at the genesis of our conversation today, as I said, frightening and fascinating, and using this information to steer their interests right here on our soil. Now, I mentioned this a couple times. Without further ado, discernibly one of, by far, our country's greatest patriots, someone I am incredibly proud and honored to call a friend, someone out of all the people that I've worked with in my career, by far one of the most brilliant minds. By far, I'm talking about retired Brigadier General Dan Goodrich from the United States Air Force, 30 years in the Air Force. His resume is, let's just say, it's amazing. An Air Force grad, but he completed his Air Force career at the Pentagon serving as the Deputy for Air Force Intelligence, a true expert in operational intelligence. General, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's great to be here, and thank you for the kind words.
Always a pleasure, sir. Always a pleasure. And I know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you joining us today. So let's just jump right into it. Got some questions for you. First question is, what countries are focused on the United States, and why?
Well, I think it's a pretty easy question. There's no doubt that, especially lately in the news, that China is very interested in doing a few things, but more than anything, they want to be the number one country in the world. So China is certainly the top threat that we have right now. Russia, in the news a lot lately with the war in Ukraine. So very much an adversary, but not to the degree that the Chinese are to us. North Korea, and I mentioned North Korea, it's a small nation, but those three are important to us because they're all three nuclear threats. They have nuclear weapons and have the desire to use them, or at least they have access to them. Iran, Iraq, Syria, or other smaller nations that we also keep an eye on because they've caused us problems in the past. But more importantly, they would like to see us be less important in the world. So those countries are the main ones, and I would put China at the top of the heap by a lot.
And I think that's fascinating too, General, because when you hear about so many people focusing on Russia, I don't know that we focus on China as much as we should. So I find it fascinating and encouraging that you were leading with that. I think that's really important. To the extent that you can, though, sir, to the extent that you can you explain how our government manages its responsibility to protect American citizens right here on our soil from other countries gathering intelligence or from quote unquote domestic spying right here on our own soil?
Well, that's one of the main goals of both the U.S. Air Force intelligence, but intelligence as a whole, is to counteract any intelligence gathering mechanisms that China, Russia, or any country has. We do that a plethora of ways, but one of the main ways we do it is we use our intelligence apparatus of our own, such as you talked about SIGINT, and there's communications intelligence, so that we track everything that comes into this nation, everything that goes on inside, at least adversarial people, our enemies, and what they do within our country. So it's critical that we stay on top of it. It's critical that our intelligence agencies are funded and are allowed to do their job.
And I think that's an important point to kind of lay on the table here, sir, because when we think about so much attention that's put into where we spend money, and what we do and what we invest in, it always brings me back for being the day I was sworn in, about protecting our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And when we talk about domestic spying, when we talk about the amount of money other countries are spending to spy on us on this soil, I think it's more than apropos that you bring that point up, that we need to invest and make sure we have the countermeasures in place to protect our country, to identify those sources that are, quite frankly, right here. I mean, would you agree, General, unequivocally, that these countries we're talking about are here on American soil?
No, there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. And that's one of the things that in years past, many years ago, one of the main ways of collecting information was using HUMINT. You had human intelligence gatherers, either overseas, not so much within the border, but overseas to determine what the adversaries were doing. But for many years, we've got away from the HUMINT portion of it, increased SIGINT and all of its capabilities, which was great. But early in the 2000s and during the Afghanistan situation, we built up the HUMINT's capabilities again, and which I think is critical because machines can do a lot of things, and we won't even get into AI, but machines can do a lot of things, but there's nothing better than having a human on the ground figuring out what's really happening.
No question. And I will tell you, having lived in that world for the majority of my career, one of the fascinating parts about how we do that is that the time that it takes to earn the right to get close to adversaries where they'll bequeath information to people to you, thinking that you are a trusted source. And you really can't get better than that as far as information that could be adversely affecting our country. There's no question about that. So with that being said, and that marriage into technology, briefly, General, when you saw what was going on with this quote unquote balloon, your thoughts on what that really was, I think would be great right now, if you could share that with us.
Well, one of the first things that caught my attention was the fact that they kept on calling it a balloon. You and I know a little bit more about what that balloon may be, but for the most people, they're thinking of a weather balloon, a little thing that has kind of, it's white colored and it's kind of odd shape, not looking like a balloon. But people need to understand that this balloon was the size of 3 yellow school buses. It was huge. And all that area was used with machinery for collecting data. And that's what they did. From the time they left China, which was earlier than they talked about for months, it was earlier than when they first announced that it was coming across. It really didn't even get notified. We didn't really were notified till it was in the contiguous United States. It flew all over Alaska, came down through the western part of the United States, through the central part, and then worked its way down to the south and near Charleston Air Force Base in Charleston, South Carolina. Uninhibited for all intents and purposes.
General, any hesitation in your mind that this was a deliberate act on the part of China and that they were gleaning signals intelligence from that apparatus?
Absolutely. And the other thing they were figuring out is, what will we do about it? They flew for the longest time and there was no reaction. And there wasn't any reaction. And there's all kinds of reasons for not taking it down in certain areas. But if this wasn't a probe by the Chinese, I don't know what it was. They were collecting information and they were probing to see what we would do.
So to clarify for our audience, not only were they gathering signals intelligence from us at critical sites like over our bombers and over our silos and over our military installations, but it was also a penetration test to see what our response time would be and what our response would be overall to this apparatus flying over our country. Fair statement?
Fair statement. And
okay.
And you got to remember, this was huge. This is a 3 buses size. It wasn't just a balloon. And
Can't miss this.
sometimes that's lost in all the translations of this spy balloon, but that's a big deal.
So when you heard the story come out that, well, this is a weather balloon gone astray, did you have a good laugh with that one, General, or what? I know I did.
It made me pause. That's for sure. I'll never criticize the information we get openly, but I thought that was kind of wild.
That was. All right. So would you refer to this then as data mining?
Oh, absolutely, to a degree. Now, data mining in and of itself is a critical part of intelligence gathering.
What exactly is data mining?
In my mind, data mining is going out and it's like a vacuum cleaner. You vacuum up all the information you can. In years ago, a while back, there was ways of getting it, and then you had people that would go sift through this data and be able to put together a picture. Now there is so much data gathered that a human can't sift through it. It has to be done by another machine as they put everything together. Absolutely, to differentiate in business, data mining is a big deal in business because people need to know what people want to buy and how they're going to react to different products. Same with Intel. We need to know what's out there and more importantly, not only what's out there that we can figure out, but what we think the enemy is figuring out and what they're learning from this data.
And the reason I bring that up, General, is because so many people have asked the question, well, if this was really an intelligence gathering exercise, why wouldn't they just, get their information from a satellite? My response to that, correct me if I'm wrong, is when we look at signals intelligence is radio traffic or cell traffic. And when that goes up to the Earth's atmosphere, by the time it hits a satellite, it's losing some of that information. Yep. But when it still is gathered at that 40 or 50,000 foot range, you're getting all of that information in that vacuum you're talking about. And that's why that device was so important, because they weren't losing clarity by using a satellite. And then it's disseminated immediately to whatever site China was sending it to. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. And what you're doing is you're funneling, you're cutting the funnel down. In other words, you're grabbing a whole bunch of information as it goes up and then can be disseminated from a lower altitude balloon, if you will, realizing that it's more than a balloon. And then by the time it goes up, that there's timing associated with it that's slowed down, and there's the amount of information they can gather from it is decreased.
Last question, General. Based on all this information that you were just kind enough to share, telling our audience, how does this affect them?
Well, the first thing you need to do is not be paranoid about it. There's your data's being collected by MasterCard and all the rest of the credit card companies. So you have to be aware that your data, everything you have, and you mentioned it earlier, is being collected. But I think for everyone that's listening, me included, you included, you have to be careful on how you allow your information to be collected. I mean, I have quite a few. I'm not getting any younger myself, so I have quite a few older friends who somehow get scammed, and scamming is a perfect example of data being given to somebody for no reason other than you think you're going to get something back for, but you don't. So, you, as a whole, as an approach to life, you should be very careful on your own personal data. But having said that, we don't need to be walking around like, you can't do anything because of the enemies looking at it. Well, they may or may not be, but you got to live your life. But the data thing is important. Really watch that.
Well, General, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us, and hopefully I can convince you to we can get on your schedule again so you can join us again in the future.
Yeah, anytime, Paul. You know that.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure seeing you. Thank you for joining us.
You too. Thank you.
All right, sir. So we're going to go to the questions, and our question comes in today from Alan in Los Angeles. Alan asks the direct question. Aren't we, Paul, saw you were asked, Wow, okay. My own handwriting's really bad. Paul, saw you were doing this subject on domestic spying. Question, aren't we due 100% transparency from our government? Alan, great question. Answer, no. But let me explain the no. One, I'm glad you asked it. Are we due 100% transparency? The reason why I immediately say no is because the very essence of intelligence gathering on the part of the United States is for us to garner information that's preemptive in nature so that we can implement certain countermeasures to prevent incidents from actually happening. If we are so transparent that we, as our military, the greatest military in the world, if our government itself were to share secret information, classified information, because we feel because our public feels that they are due 100% transparency, we would be compromising the very fabric of protection we are working so hard to weave in this country. That's why we are not guaranteed that. That secrecy, and I will tell you this, Alan, I will tell you this. As God is my judge, I have been with my wife, married 40, coming on 42, together 46, and there is a significant amount of my career she will never know. My closest friends still have no idea about a good portion of what I've done for a living. Why? Because they don't have a need to know. I was given the blessing. I was given the honor of serving this country in a very unique way. And with that comes my word, my obligation to make sure that we protect all of our citizens against enemies, foreign and domestic. And now a lot of that means keeping our information on a need-to-know basis so that we can protect our citizens. Now, am I saying that government officials and politicians shouldn't be transparent? No, they should be. And they fail violently at that. And that definitely needs to be improved. But in just the intel world, hopefully that answers your question. As we finish up today, I'm going to switch to the board. And the board, those of you hopefully are starting to warm up to my cork board. Obviously, those of you in my age group will appreciate a cork board. Those of you younger may not know that a cork board actually existed at one time. But nonetheless, our cork board is going to sum up today. And I want to start with number one. Number one is remember how important the three types of intel are. How we gather intelligence. Open source information, signals intelligence, meaning what we talked about, what the general talked about relative to the spy balloon, that vacuum, that data mining, that information that comes up from cell phones and radios and it's disseminated. Signals intelligence and human intelligence. The use of a human being, an asset in foreign countries or here, getting close to adversaries to the point where we're able to garner information that's critical to be preemptive in protecting America. Those are the three. Don't forget those. Real important. Real important. And plus, now the next time you're at some place and you start throwing out the old human intel and signals intel, you know what? You know what you're talking about. What the balloon actually did. Number two, what the balloon actually did. Please remember what General Goodrich was talking about when it comes to what the balloon actually did. There have been so many stories, and this is the beauty of this show, because it is fact-based. I could care less what side of the aisle likes it or doesn't like it. The facts are the facts. The balloon was data mining. It was gathering information by China on us to use at a later date. End of story. As General Goodrich pointed out, again, it was a penetration test. It was to poke the bear to see what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. How long is it going to take? How are we going to respond? Otherwise known as a penetration test. So let's not forget that. Three, what is data mining? Again, I go back to my dear friend General Goodrich's explanation, and I love that because it's a vacuum. Think of this massive amount of information. Right now, it could be your Google account. It could be all the times that you go on the internet. Or in this case, it's the garnering of information from wide sources like this massive vacuum. It sucks it all up, and then it mines it. It finds out what is valuable, what is not valuable, what can be used, what could not be used. Now, what does this have to do with you? Okay, well, very simply put, as to give you an example, one of the reasons why we did as a firm, we started our own search engine because we got tired of the data mining from Google, from all these search engines that said, oh, we don't share that information. Of course they do. You get any pop-ups? Well, they're sharing your information. You go and you take a look at a particular site, and the next minute, you're getting all these pop-ups from, that's data mining. On the Intel side, it's the same thing. Remember what that is. 4, why your information is important. Again, I just referenced this, but I will say this, though. Think about how to protect your information and what you can do right now, right this minute. Be careful how you use the internet. We started stealthsearch.org. That's right. Look on your screen, stealthsearch.org. It is a proprietary, it is free, it's a proprietary search engine, it's a meta search engine, and it will prevent data mining. So check it out if you're concerned about that. 5, understand the threat from abroad on our soil is real. I asked General Goodrich a very direct question. He answered me, as he always does. God bless him. And that is that these countries are here. Is China here? Is Russia here? Is North Korea here? Yes. Yes. Yeah, they're here. Cuba, here. Venezuela, here. Yes. That's a fact. Get freaked out? Absolutely not. But be aware. Be aware that that is in fact the case. It's not TV. This is real. And last but not least, and I'll leave you with this, be proud of our efforts. I know that there's so much information out there right now about what we as a country do to gather information. I will tell you this, from the little bit I can share, I will tell you this. I will never, ever share what I've done in my service to this country, and I will always be proud of the information we were able to gather, things we were able to do, and all the people in all our agencies that are living abroad or right among us that are protecting us from the myriad of catastrophic events that will never happen and you will never know about. That's how important our intelligence gathering is in this country. So remember, this threat, it's real, but we're a whole lot better at gathering intelligence than others. We just need to be aware as Americans that this exists. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News.